Just be a sec here. I'll remember to turn off my feed again.
Put that sign up again. I didn't. I read COVID-19. I think I even read flu.
Sorry. Okay. There we go. All right. All right. Welcome everyone to the Kindly Ops Talk Show, a show about technology and helping people work together. We do this live every Monday and Friday at 12 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Mondays are generally focused on developing technology, and Fridays we focus on people working together. So all the stories that go in there. If you're new to the show, feel free to submit questions in the question box where you can vote up on questions that you really want to be answered by the panelists. And today we're talking about technical certifications. So what is the point? Is there a point of technical certifications? Have you failed at getting a certification that you really, really worked hard on, or maybe you had to do it a bunch of times? And why are some industry certifications regulated while others are not? So to begin this discussion with technical certifications, I'd like to maybe turn it to Chris. You just went through something that was pretty intensive. Maybe share your experience about that, but also kind of what you feel is the point of technical certifications.
That's a good question. Like, what is the point of a technical certification? Um, well, it's kind of implied in the name, right? It's to certify something. So it certifies that you have a baseline knowledge at a certain level, depending on the certification, right? So that could be either for a prospective client or an employer that's looking for somebody that has this baseline knowledge, right? So that's kind of what it certifies you for. It's not, what it is not like an instant way to get a job that you want. It's not going to be something that gives you everything that you need to know about a job either. It's not, just because you have a certification doesn't mean you have all the knowledge that you need to accomplish a task. But it does provide proof that you have a baseline understanding of something technical. And there's so many different aspects of that with technical certifications. There's so many different technical certifications. Some are worth it. Some are not so much worth it. And a lot of that has to do, in my opinion, with well, the context, right? Are you going for a certification because your employer said he'll give you a raise? Then it might be worth it. If you're getting a certification because somebody on the internet said this certification is going to get you a job, well, maybe there should be some more research into that certification because there's so many out there and there's so much advice on it. So really, if you're going for a certification, make sure there's like a reason to actually go for it that's proven, because they can be very expensive and you wouldn't want to, not just with money, but with time, right? So you don't want to just dive into a certification not having something there on the other side for you already.
Sure. So there's like there's
Yeah.
the part where it's like the baseline, but then also you want to do your research first to see maybe your motive for getting the certification. Elliot?
Yeah, so there's like two different interest groups promoting certifications, right? One is people who are selling hopes and dreams, aka the education industry, and so they want to convince you, like Chris said, like somebody on the internet said that if you get the certification, your life is going to get a lot better because you can earn more money. The other interest is like people who are deliberately and with usually good motivation trying to exclude some people from part of an industry or from doing a certain job, usually as a quality filter. And it's usually a very crude, inaccurate quality filter that is still useful. So it is, you are literally going around putting up, you must be this tall to ride this ride signs around a part of an industry or around part of a job function. It doesn't mean, it's like a driver's license. It doesn't mean at all that you're a good driver. it does mean you passed like some arbitrary minimum bar, and maybe it was really hard and maybe it was really easy, but it's still a pretty minimum bar, and that's just like the cost of admission. It doesn't mean you're actually doing a good job. It doesn't mean people are going to like you as a driver. It doesn't mean you're going to get a job as a driver, but that is just like the cost of admission, and it still is generally considered useful as long as it's filtering out a bunch of exceptionally terrible drivers or exceptionally bad quality. There are still people who don't have a license, who aren't tall enough to ride the ride, who didn't quite manage to have the resources to pass the certification, whether it's time or money, that could be fantastic at that thing. So it doesn't just because you don't have a certification doesn't mean you're not good at it. It's literally just a barrier that is arbitrarily constructed because it helps filter some low quality out.
Nice. Nice. So, talking about that barrier, then, so what are maybe some examples of like some valuable barriers? Like Elliot, you mentioned that there was like some certifications that you thought, okay, yeah, you have to be this tall to ride. That makes sense because you don't want to be put yourself or somebody else in maybe a harmful situation. But what are some examples of that maybe that you guys have had experience with? Maybe Kevin, I'd like your thoughts on that.
Hey, I apologize. Your audio is a little bit light for me, so I think I heard your question of some examples of like useful barriers. I think there's definitely different industries that have really useful barriers. Like food safety is a huge thing, right? Like if I can't get somebody the basic training and signed, like documented date that they learned the safe practices about how to handle food, it's going to be very difficult for me to expect them or enforce them to meet those criteria, right? You have to have this mechanism of like, you were informed this is the standard to keep a job here. This is the standard you didn't meet because of these reasons. Like, you have to have some mechanism there of everybody getting on the same page, so to speak. And so, like, food to me seems like such an easy example of that. But there are definitely some other areas, like security is one area where computer security is what I'm referring to. But you can very quickly create a massive amount of liability for yourself in a cloud provider and have successfully made an application work at the same time, but like there's all this hidden liability there because of your lack of awareness. So it's not that I don't think people should experiment, but that if you're taking something out public and you're going to expose it, just like if you're going to take your car to an area where car break-ins are common, you might take some extra precautions for that. There's definitely a value in people being aware that certification exists around sensitive matters so that they can take them a bit more seriously and more clearly address whether or not that should apply to them. But like, we all cook food at our house. So I think there's definitely that balance that needs to come back all the time as a reminder of like, you can't get so carried away in these qualitative things that are arbitrary and think you're talking about the same thing. My wife's a hairstylist. The certifications involved in that industry are completely from a different, even breed of perspective than those that are in the tech industry. And they're not the same thing. And so when you compare them, you're not comparing the same type of certification. So I went on a little bit of a rant there, but I do think there is some.
No, I think that's really good. I think that thinking about why maybe, like you've mentioned, computer security, why there may not be as many regulatory, or maybe there's not a regulatory agency behind that's issuing certifications. Maybe getting into that a little bit. Who'd like to speak to that about maybe some areas that where you think that we need some kind of regulatory commission, company, panel, whatever it be, to issue some of these certifications that are being issued right now? Elliot?
Regulation is pretty tricky because it's so crude. What I mean by that is like the amount of control you can exert, the steering mechanisms that you have are so disconnected and far away from what you're actually trying to regulate. And so it's lowest common denominator stuff. And there is a multi-year, if not multi-decade lag behind the cutting edge of technology. And so one of the reasons I think we haven't seen regulation more widespread in technology and software particularly is because law regulation lags just by its nature, like so many years behind current practice. Other areas where the rate of change is a lot slower, we see there's, or the cost is a lot higher. We see certifications. So like hairstylists, many professions, right? Like what it makes it a profession versus a professional job versus an assistant job is you got a certification, certified public accountant, hairstylist, real estate agent or broker. So many of these professions that we interact with have regulatory bodies associated with them. And then those certs have to get updated every 10 years or so. But tech moves so fast, it's difficult to imagine a genuinely useful certification. We've seen some being put out by vendors themselves. I mean, this starts to touch on a little bit what we've got a question about. But vendors sometimes make up their own certifications. These aren't required by the government. And that's just like saying that this person has gotten familiar with a body of knowledge around a product offering usually. And those are useful sort of like as a shorthand to communicate status. But all they are really certifying is that you learned a bunch of information about the stuff that this vendor put out. It still doesn't like guarantee anything.
Well, that's really good. So we see maybe the vendor coming in and stepping in to be that kind of regulatory party, I guess you could say. We have a question here from Lance. He says, generally speaking, is there any point for a self-employed person, maybe a contractor, to get a technical certification? Does the process have an educational benefit, or is it pretty much strictly to show what you already know? I'm sure there's probably a lot of variables in that. But first, let's take that first question. If you already have proven that you have expertise or experience, maybe as a contractor, let's say, what would be the point of getting a technical certification in that situation, in that scenario? Maybe Chris, we can get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, if you already have the knowledge, that's kind of also what the certification is for, but now you just have actual proof, right? Because you could put on a resume, I did such and such, but really you have no other proof. But if you have a third party certifying that you do have this knowledge, then that does add a little bit, quite a bit to your resume, I think.
Brandon?
I'm not exactly sure how this would fall into the field of like technical certifications, but I'm thinking about stories I've heard from friends in the construction background where one of my friends went and took his license test for flooring, and in the same classroom was an older gentleman who's a painter. And he said about 30 minutes into the class, he slammed his book shut. Expletive this, I've been painting for 30 plus years and this is ridiculous. And he walked out. So something about that test must have contained a lot of things that gentleman felt were irrelevant to the fact that he knows how to do his job already, and why are they making it so difficult for him to maybe become a licensed painter and start his own company. So I don't know, perhaps in the technical field, maybe you're an excellent coder or whatever you do, but now you're going to get certified and they have all these hoops for you to jump through that maybe you feel are completely irrelevant to the tasks that you're going to be doing or performing for a customer.
No, that's a super valid point. And that kind of maybe opens up a little bit of the conversation is like to the panel here is like what certifications have you gotten that you thought were extremely valuable? You thought, okay, I did it. I worked hard. I did it. And then what ones that you gotten that you thought, okay, I did not need to get this. I didn't need to put in this effort in order to tell everybody else that I know how to do this thing. Maybe I know, Chance, you just took a certification. Why don't you share?
Yeah, so I felt that the course that I took was very valuable for me in my career. It was actually the certified Scrum Master, teaching the principles of Agile and the whole Scrum process. And I was already doing it to some capacity. Like Brandon said, the painter has been doing painting for years. Why learn more? But in this case, I was doing it, but doing it with minimal knowledge. So I wasn't doing it as effectively in my role as I was post-certification. And I learned how to describe the subject matter better. I was referring to Agile as a methodology rather than a set of values and principles. And I was referring to Scrum as like a project management process, but it's really a framework for teams to work together to crunch out complex work. And so I think for me going through that course, I learned quite a bit more than I would just studying on my own. And it was satisfying at the end to be able to answer and pass the test and feel more confident in myself in that role in my organization.
Nice, thanks for sharing. If you don't mind sharing, did you have to take the test more than once, or were you able to get it the first time?
I was able to pass the first time. And in fact, I think it's a pretty simple test. Most people pass on their first attempt.
Nice, thanks for sharing. Yeah, I know, Chris, you took a massive certification course here recently. Why don't you share your experience with that, and kind of also some of the what if it was, or what benefits you gained from it, but also kind of the realm of difficulty that it was.
Yeah, so I recently just passed the OSCP exam, which is an exam governed by offensive security. It's the folks behind the Kali Linux. And it was a really difficult exam. Yeah, that OSCP exam is no joke. It's a 24-hour exam, and it's proctored now. It used to not be, but now they record all your screens and they record you during it. And obviously I can't talk too much about the exam, but it's a very difficult exam. I failed the first try, but then I did really well the second try. And I think what had happened was the first time was that I kind of got in my own head a little bit, where you don't really, there's the unknown of jumping into this exam and you don't really know what to expect. And with something that's proctored like that, nerves for me add quite a bit. So you're just kind of like clicking around, and then next thing you know, you're like, oh, where's my methodology for this? Like, you need to refocus. But by the time that happened the first time, where you try to refocus, you run out of time, right? Because you got to sleep in there for at least a couple of hours. But yeah, that was intense. But after failing, it sounds strange, but you feel so much better taking it the second time, because you know what to expect, you know what you're getting into, and there's no surprises. Obviously, whenever you take the exam, it's probably going to be a different box or different set of boxes. But I did super well on my second attempt, and I got into all the boxes. And yeah, as far as that goes, I think the whole experience of OSCP was a really good learning experience. It's not as, I wouldn't say the course is as guided as other courses as far as certifications go. So you do have to have at least, if not some experience beforehand, at least supplementing it with your own training or research into your methodology that you want to construct as a pen tester. But I think touching on what Chance mentioned too, it definitely fills in a lot of gaps of knowledge when you're taking a course, especially a difficult course, for a certification that I find extremely useful. OSCP is very useful a certification to get if you're a pen tester. But yeah, it was a really good educational experience for me, and yeah, helped me to
That's awesome.
Not worry so much about failing.
Yeah, so it like Chance said, you put it into perspective, and then Chris, you said you're basically it gave you it not only filled in the gaps of your knowledge, but it also maybe even gave you some more confidence as you had to take that test again. Elliot?
Yeah, every certification I've ever worked on, whether I passed or failed, definitely provoked some learning. The thing that really stood out to me, so the first certification I took was in college. I was doing a work-study program. I had been homeschooled all the way through the end of high school, just so very independent, no supervision, and then doing this apprenticeship program with a big electronics manufacturer. At the end of the 2-year program, there was a 3-day exam, and a significant portion of the exam was troubleshooting. And not only was it proctored, there was an instructor, a supervisor, standing over the shoulder of each person taking the exam for the whole half-day troubleshooting section with a clipboard, and you could not touch anything without telling them why. And that really impressed on me that a big part of what certifications are about is not testing technical knowledge at all. And I think this connects back to the story that Brandon told. It can be, if somebody has the perspective of like, this is all about technical expertise, they can get really frustrated with the process. But if you recognize this is an arbitrary barrier that they're asking me to see if I can climb over, not to see whether I'm smart or not, but to see if I can climb over this arbitrary barrier. A lot of what it's testing is communication skills and like logical planning skills and the ability to overcome an arbitrary obstacle. That's a big part of it. And so they actually set us up with practice exams. I'm so glad they did, because I think all of us would have failed immediately if they hadn't forced us to go through a couple of practice exams. That kind of worked out the nerves that Chris was talking about that inevitably set in the first time you go through that kind of intensely supervised examination. And then when we got to the real thing at the end, fortunately, everybody passed.
Nice. Very nice. That kind of plays into a little bit when you're talking about that barrier and being able to actually, being able to actually utilize a certification in it to do the thing that it was purposed or created to do. The question that Kevin Smith asks, he says, what role does the price of a certification play? This follow-up is that purely a way for the issuer to make more money based on their reputation, or is it a way to, again, add like an even further barrier to the certification process? I know there's some certifications that cost absolutely nothing and some that cost quite a bit. I know, Brandon, the certification that you went through fairly recently, maybe you share that kind of experience, and then as one end, and then we can take it from the other angle after that.
Cool. Yeah. So I will preface this by saying that I'm a terrible test taker and did not do very well in school. But anyway, so I took a certification for Google AdWords, and I did this because my wife's uncle has a company that had a website, and I wanted to help him kind of, drive business towards that. And I found that going through the certification, I didn't do it because I wanted to get, a job in that field, but I wanted to just learn, okay, what can I do to help him out here? So I went through the certification and took the test and failed. And so I wasn't really learning, I guess, like my plan was. But again, that goes back to me not being the best at taking a test. But I went through it again and did a little bit better. And I'm not going to lie, I did cheat a little with Googling some of the answers, only because I just wanted to get through it. Again, I wasn't going to use it for anything work related. I was just trying to wrap my brain around a little more about how the Google AdWords was working and what things I needed to modify on his setup. But it did give a different perspective as far as, okay, what about the people who are using that certification for work? Just because you have that certification doesn't mean that you know what you're doing, because going back to me, I could just look over on my other screen. It's not like Chris, they're not filming me, they're not monitoring my screen. I'm just getting the answers and print it out, and look what I got, a certification. So I don't know, sometimes it goes back to like, I'm sure there are a lot of certifications that are just bogus, I guess you could say. Like, what's to say because you have this certification that you know what you're doing? And real quick too, I don't know, kind of ties in a little bit, but I have another friend who is a licensed contractor, general contractor, and he's very knowledgeable in every aspect of building from the ground up. And every 2 years, he has to do continuing education. So for the past 5 years, starting when his daughter was 12, he paid her $200 to do the continuing education. And a 12-year-old child passed continuing education for a certified Florida general contractor, and every other period since she has passed that for him. So again, certifications and being qualified, he knows what he's doing. He's just not book smart, and not only that, but when does he have the time to sit down and take this several hour course when he's working full time and then invoicing and dealing with customers? That's the last thing he wanted to do. So I don't know how that falls in, but this whole conversation made me think of that, and I always laugh at that story.
No, that's great. Elliot?
So I want to tell a story about renting certifications, right? So that's one thing, is like pay somebody else to take the certification. This is why the exam Chris was talking about is proctored now, where they actually watch you the whole time, because this is very widespread. So in the DevOps field, the AWS certifications are considered somewhat prestigious. They're known for being difficult to get. They're also expensive. And then furthermore, in order to be able to have certain partner relationships, you have to have a certain number of people on your staff with who are certified at a certain level. And so these are just legal contracts enforced by the vendor. So shortly after we started our company, I started getting offers from people on LinkedIn to lease me their certifications as a business owner. And so they're like, hey, I've got this certification. I'm happy to lease it to you for this much a year, and I'll be on your staff, so to speak. So that's people they'll make a business out of any kind of cheating. Those certifications are a couple $1,000s probably when you combine training and the exam attempt. The most expensive certifications I know about, there's probably more expensive ones, but the most expensive ones I know about relative to how much you make with a certification is for a helicopter pilot, because the cost of equipment and fuel for practicing is so high. So say you want to fly medevac for a hospital. Not only do you need to get a certain number of hours of training on a certain type of equipment that is extremely expensive, you then, after you get your license, your cert, you have to have several thousand hours of job experience flying that equipment before you can qualify to walk in the door for the interview. That is literally so expensive. The only way people can do it is going into the military. Nobody else has the actual millions of dollars that it takes to get that certification process.
That's interesting. So it's like that. It's not only just the expertise that's needed, but that barrier to entry. It's the degree of expertise that's needed is so high that it's pretty much there's only maybe one or two avenues of actually getting it. That's interesting. So that's the other end then, right? Because Google AdWords is still that's still a free certification, correct? Yeah. So Kevin.
I think the stories Brandon shared, contrast well with what Ellie was just sharing about something that's really difficult to do, and there's a lot of danger involved with doing it poorly. But that I think is a huge thing to factor in too, in just terms of understanding why you take a certain certification seriously in your industry, and genuinely, or not genuinely, but sincerely testing that, from time to time to see if that still holds true. There's a HubSpot certification for a number of things that HubSpot offers as services. And when you're hunting around for contractors, it's true. Just about any of those contractors probably could have had a training video open while they clicked answers in a multiple choice form that HubSpot made as a lead magnet to get them to use their services in their marketing agency or freelance work. However, it's a pretty low risk vocabulary that I'm finding shared with that contractor by understanding I'm looking for someone in a HubSpot. These people have 7 HubSpot certifications. They bothered to click through the form. That tells me they're more interested than someone who didn't bother the form potentially. I mean, it's not a 100% trust thing, but it does help you sometimes narrow things down. But it's really that awareness of just that every certification that exists is not from some formal education body that exists in the world that is making it valuable to you personally because they understand what you need to be protected from. Like, I don't want people not having certifications and flying planes. Like, that's great that there's a huge barrier to entry there, but like, it is pretty silly sometimes when somebody won't pay you $50 to do something for them because like you don't have like a little stamp somewhere. It's like, what's the risk of, like, how hard is the task? And actually, do you need a certification for that? AdWords, brand and prove that there's like the mechanism of certifying is not an important part, but he was tracking down knowledge, and that does equip you to use AdWords if you can figure out how to track down the knowledge. So it's just kind of like, got to keep a broad perspective on it, I think, because it's really easy to get into this mindset that's narrow, and then it doesn't apply somewhere you turn.
Yeah, true. Elliot?
And to continue that, like those certifications come in at a certain point in the life cycle of the industry. So the Wright brothers, when they were inventing airplanes, were not certified pilots. And the people who created HubSpot did not have HubSpot certifications. Like any of the name brand software that I've worked on, running the engineering team who was creating it, like I didn't have the certifications that company later created certifying me in that software. And so you also want to think about, like, where am I working in the technology spectrum? If I'm working anywhere near the cutting edge, certifications are probably not going to be so useful for me. If I'm working on service delivery, something that is more available off the shelf, certifications might be very useful, or they might actually be required. And so it sort of depends on where in the spectrum you're working. And some of us hop back and forth every day. But that's a big factor. So you may have to rely on totally different mechanisms the closer you get to new technology being invented.
For sure. And then also maybe even that might even come into play as far as the pricing of the certification, right? AWS certification right now might be at a certain, maybe we could call it premium price, but maybe as that becomes the norm, that pricing can perhaps change as the value of that specific certification lowers. So that's also an interesting thought. Have you, maybe anyone can share, but they're just the worst experience that they've had? Maybe it was with a facility, maybe it was with the test taker or the proctor, or maybe it was just with the actual test itself. I know there's some horror stories in this group. Elliot?
It feels terrible to fail, right? Like, even when you knew, like, I didn't study as much as I probably should have, I skipped a little of material, it feels bad to fail. So I think probably the hardest one for me was the remote pilot license for flying drones. I just wanted to be able to, like, fly commercially, and, like, since I have a small business, pretty much anything I do with it, I needed to have that commercial license. But the knowledge portion of the exam, there's no practical skills test for that remote pilot certification. It's purely the knowledge portion of a regular private pilot's test. So I had to learn all of the radio stuff and all of the weather stuff, which are two areas I knew absolutely nothing about. So the amount of studying I had to do was pretty large. I didn't have, any of my previous experience didn't help. And that was just, like, really, really difficult. I was actually sweating during the exam. I failed a bunch of the practice tests. So that one felt really stressful, even though in the back of my mind, like, it wasn't going to affect my job. It didn't matter whether I passed or failed. I wanted it, and it felt really stressful taking it. But the thing that I try and tell people, and it was really hard for me to believe and feel in the moment, is if you nail it, if you nail the exam, you wasted money. And so I always tell people, like, hey, people working at Kindly Ops, like, hey, you're going to go for the certification. That's great. Shoot for an 80%, shoot for 75%. You want to get a pass, try to get a pass. It's totally okay if you fail. If you pass at 99%, I'm going to feel like we wasted money for you studying too much, right? And so, like, the goal is a pass. The goal is not to spend tons and tons of time and money getting a perfect score. It doesn't matter at all.
That's a really nice perspective, especially as a business owner. I know for me personally, anytime that an employer has perhaps put a certification, or maybe offered to pay for a certification, I know personally I always ask, well, then why is this needed? Like, where's the skill gap that I have? And not to take it super personally, because things change and that's just how industry is sometimes. But where's the skill gap that I need to fill that this certification will fill? So again, going kind of back, what we've been circling back to, really the motive, or really what's behind it, it's like that's kind of at the foundation of why you would even get a certification. Elliot?
So I thought of another horror story. I was taking one of the AWS certifications, and I studied hard on it. And this was an area where, unlike the remote pilot one, I used this stuff every day for years. And I failed it so bad. I did terrible. I spent hundreds of dollars taking it. I felt awful. Months later, this was actually a beta exam, and months later, AWS announced that they scrapped it and rewrote it. So lots of people were failing it. So like, I had never even considered that idea that like, hey, maybe this is a bad exam. I just felt terrible for 3 months about failing it. When they released the new one, I managed to pass the new one on my next try, and that went much better. But that was also a really stressful one.
Oh, that's really good. And I know, Chris, you just went through that stressful one. Go ahead and share.
Well, I was going to comment about a horror story I had when I was also taking an AWS cert.
Go ahead.
The whole like Proctor going to the testing center, like you said, can kind of be questionable itself. Like, I don't know if they have a certification that they have to go through to be a testing center, but they probably should. Because in general, there's kind of dirty and anyways. So I'm in maybe the exam. It's probably a 2 hour. I forget what the professional level. It was. I think it was DevOps Pro. I was going for an AWS certification, and I was like halfway through. It was a lot of time had passed, and it quits. Like the program just quits, exits out. Like there's nothing on the desktops because it's in that like proctored window, and it says like something ridiculous like network error, connection error, exiting exam. Something that, like, the error was way worse than what was actually happening. It was like, now your exam is over, thank you, because of the network died. It was worded very very terribly. And I remember like having to like run over to the proctor that was outside in the other office, and she had to call tech support, and she was on the phone with tech support for like 20 minutes probably. So I think they paused my time, and here I am thinking like, I just wasted like all this time driving over to this testing center that's kind of in the middle of nowhere. Man, that was a terrible experience. But somehow I passed still, so I don't know.
No, that's rough. I know I did a lot of work with coffee, and like there's a certifications that people kind of wear as badges of honor instead of actually being pertinent or relevant, or rather pertinent to their job, their daily job functions. So for example, like everyone wants to, not everyone, but a lot of people, they have it's a point of pride when they get to be a Q grader, which means that you can grade raw beans, at the farm. But that certification is a great certification. There's a great program behind it. There's a regulatory board behind it, but the most people that are getting it are not people that are actually buying green beans. It's people that are like preparing, consumer drinks, a lot of them, or selling roasted coffee. So imagine getting the certification that costs thousands of dollars and a ton of time, and then but your application of it is, there's no real world application really that's pertinent to that particular, to sell, a bag of coffee to someone. Are there any in the technical realm, like any of those kinds of things, Elliot?
There definitely are, and I wouldn't discourage anybody from going to get any certification they have the remotest interest in. Like for me, they always provoke learning. But there is definitely this thing about collecting points or collecting badges, right? And so for a job hunter, I would really caution people, not against getting certifications, anything that's available to you, But against listing every single certification you've ever gotten your whole life, like on your resume, like you're somebody just walking in with like all the 35 Boy Scout badges they got when they were a little kid. And you're like, that's not really relevant for your lawyer interview, Mr. Job Candidate. So getting certifications is one thing, but definitely don't list every single one that you've ever gotten in your life on your resume or bring them up in the conversation in the interview. When they're relevant, if somebody's asking about them, share that you have them, but I would not glue them to the outside of your car.
In that same context, yeah, or also don't expect them to automatically give you an extra $5,000 to $10,000 a year or whatever the correlating compensation is too. Kevin.
If you do find one that does make you that much, you should probably start selling those, because that's a great value proposition.
There you go. You become the proctor then. Well, then maybe we could, with that kind of pivot to what certifications that you feel are actually worth it to take. I mean, we've touched on some that we have take, like AWS certifications, but what are some that you think are valuable, maybe for someone starting out in perhaps technical role? And then also maybe we could even go into like how to get started into deciding which ones to get, which ones not to. Elliot?
So we do a lot of DevOps and security work during the day. And so in that field, the AWS certifications I have found are actually useful. We're also doing an increasing amount with media, and there are no that I've found certifications that are as useful there. There are some from specific vendors that provoke learning, but they don't carry the same sort of weight in a job interview. The thing I would look at is, what's the job you want, and are those job descriptions repeatedly asking for a particular certification? You got to be careful. You can end up lowballing yourself or setting your sights too low, because sometimes a more entry-level job will list a bunch of certifications as a requirement, and a career something that's further along the career path, a higher up job, will not list any certification requirements. So just try and discern, like, what is the career ladder for this field that I want to work in, and how important or arbitrary are those certifications. A certification that I would love to get personally, but I've realized I'm not going to be able to, is Certified Public Accountant. I'm really interested in the topic of governance. I run a company that's doing security assessments, but it literally takes years and years and tens of thousands of dollars to get that CPA credential. And you need to be a CPA in order to perform a formal audit for any of the formal exams. So I've come to realize, like, the cost for me to get that personally is way higher than it would cost our company to hire somebody who has that. And so, like, I've shifted strategies on that. Like, I'm not going to become a CPA. At a certain point, we'll probably hire some CPAs in the business when we're ready to like go in and start doing that audit practice. So that's an example of one that I've given up on or shifted strategies, I guess.
Nice. Brandon?
I don't really want to get too off topic, but I was just curious. So in the construction industry, I know that if you hold a particular license, let's just say an electrical license, you can qualify up to 2 other companies with that license. So if I'm an electrician and you want a company, but you just don't want to take the certifications and get licensed, I can qualify your business. And I know several contractors that do that to gain monthly income or even percentages of the jobs that, say, the qualified person does. Can you do that, or do you know of certifications in the tech industry that perhaps, like, rather than go out and get that certification, company A qualifies me? Is that a possibility?
Yes. So there's a fine line there, or a gray area ethically, right, where you've got to make sure, It is your responsibility as a license holder to be doing the quality control to make sure that bad work isn't being passed off as okay. And there's different amounts of like how formally that concept is like totally wrapped up. So Florida, right? It's totally okay. They've given a specific number to two other companies, and that's like based on, we feel like you can reasonably supervise up to a certain amount of work going on under this license. If it's more than that, there's no way you can possibly be supervising it. So I'd say with any licensed profession I can think of, from dentists to who are the people who fill the prescriptions at the drugstore, pharmacists, to real estate broker, to lawyer, every single profession I can think of they hire assistants to help them, right? So like if I'm the person who's the license holder, I hire 1 to 20 assistants to help me who are not certified, and that lets me do more billable work. There's like a natural limit there based on like how many people I can actually supervise and work with. Like it's this sort of chief surgeon model, but that's a concept that I think is used in one way or another in every single licensed profession.
Very good. Nice. So it's possible. It's just, and I'm sure probably it even varies depending on what exactly you're actually developing to as far as compliance and security. So why don't we, so we discussed, kind of some valuable certifications. Is there kind of any resources that you guys have found that was maybe something that added to you in your step in getting a certain certification? It could be, and you can even name the certification. That's totally fine too. Elliot?
Video courses changed the game for me. So when I was studying for the AWS courses, I used parts of AWS every single day. Other parts of AWS I had never touched. It's a massive field. They have thousands of services. And a big part of those certs that I was going for was just being familiar with the breadth, so you knew when to apply things. And I found video courses dramatically changed how much I was able to pay attention and retain. Because when I was reading material stuff, I've thought I was a good reader, but when I was reading material, I would tend to skim and skip and get bored and distracted, whereas going through video helped like lock into my attention a lot more. And it's to the point that I don't even really want to do any study that doesn't include video materials or live interaction with other people who are studying the same thing, because it captures my attention so much more, and I feel like I'm able to learn so much faster. It was in retrospect, it was really frustrating trying to do reading-based book study for trying to learn quickly on anything. That's probably why I struggled so much with the drone certification.
Nice. Chris?
For anything that I typically learn, I apply a spaced repetition system using flashcards. And I started doing that because I was learning a foreign language. I was learning French, and I think at first I wanted to kind of figure out how to learn. And I read a book from an author named Gabriel Werner called Fluent Forever. And that kind of like changed the game for me just for learning in general. Because it's kind of set up a system to where it makes it so, as long as as you review things every now and then, and create and write your own flashcards, like you'll never forget things that you put in there. It's just the way your brain works, right? Like it's just, you review it spaced out. It's like some sort of Fibonacci sequence, right? Whenever you do a review every certain amount of days, then basically it keeps getting pushed out until the next time you have to review something is like in 200 years. So that like definitely helps, especially when preparing for an exam, because then you just put like the big points, you make flashcards out of the big points that were maybe in a practice test or something, and then you put that in your spaced repetition system. I use Anki, which is an iPad app, and also iPhone, iOS, ANKI, and allows you to create flashcards with audio, flashcards with drawings that you could put in. You can put in your own pictures. You can customize them for different sides, and also like multiple choice. But it's super helpful for me just for learning in general, but also going for certifications and for exams.
Nice. Really nice system. And Kevin, you've taken a few different things. What have you found, or what's a good resource or something that you found valuable in starting?
You're talking about technical certifications?
Yeah.
I agree with Elliot. The video education helps, like grab your attention. I think that when you're entering a field like um, computer development, software development, web development, whatever kind of umbrella term you want to use, it's just so huge that you need to be careful at the beginning about trusting that the outcome you expect from something that is very new to you is going to be still what you get when you get to the end of it, because of your own ability to assess that accurately. So talking to people who are already in a similar field to you, or maybe already make a similar amount of money as you hope to eventually make, or something like that, whatever the qualifier is, if you can, you probably became aware of the job you're trying to get or the field you're trying to enter from someone you know or something you heard somewhere. So like just keep digging in that direction. But just generally speaking, like for AWS, for example, I really like the stuff that A Cloud Guru puts out. I feel like they do a good no-nonsense approach to what your goal is, which is getting the certification. It's not about making yourself feel like you're clever. It's not about making yourself feel like you already know all this stuff, but it's just about like, what do you need to know to pass this test? And it's driven kind of similarly with the attitude as Elliot has, which is like, it's not about getting a perfect score. It's about passing the exam, which enables you to level up and move on to whatever the next post is. But if just for general computer knowledge, I have not seen many certifications that I feel like do a good job of that. But there are tons of free resources that are not based around a certification, but are based around literally just giving you an overview that you could go through. And they're on YouTube. There's lots of different places. But like taking a fundamentals course in whatever area and then deciding like, okay, do I want to bother getting a certification now, is probably a really cheap way to figure out if you even want to get that serious about it, or if it's all just kind of not what you thought it was. But yeah, it is tricky starting out. I definitely would talk to people that you feel like this person's a little bit similar to me, or at least knows deeper about this industry before you get too caught up. Because like boot camps, for example, they might tell you this, but if you haven't talked to somebody who got a job from taking that boot camp, you might be really disappointed.
Oh, that's a really good point, especially talking about going, getting that, or talking to somebody else that has gotten that certification. That's huge, especially deciding whether you're going to pull the thousands of dollars or hundreds of dollars, or even maybe just tens of dollars, but still the effort and all around to get it. Very good. So maybe now we have a little bit of time left. Why don't we discuss maybe the future as far as certifications? Maybe it is style, like we mentioned. Kind of we circled back to that with Elliot. Maybe it's style of delivering the educational content for a certification, or where do you think certifications are going? Maybe which ones that you think are going to be important here in the now or in the future. Anything along those lines. Kind of looking forward with technical certifications. Kevin?
Not to get too political, but I mean, I can definitely see a future where some qualifying factor about having COVID-19 is going to be on the top of people's minds if you want to work in person somewhere. So that I think is coming. Medical certifications for like your viability to be in the general population.
Oh yeah, that's definitely, I'm sure it'll pop up here in the future.
And there's an interesting opportunity or gap around like looking at a part of industry or society that you care about and trying to decide whether or not that has risen to a high enough priority or has enough visibility so that government is stepping in and regulating it, or is there a need and an opportunity for private industry to step in and set some standards, right? So we talked before a little bit about like vendor-driven certifications. Another thing that some people do is they try and set up industry body certifications, right? So the credit card industry, for example, is the ones who came up with PCI, not the federal government. Payment card industry. And so I think there's other industries out there which could benefit from having some certifications as a way of scraping out or putting up a barrier around some of the lowest quality stuff, even though they're not a silver bullet. But there are opportunities out there for new certifications to be created that actually benefit people.
Oh, I like that a lot, Kevin.
Yeah, speaking of that topic, my wife Whitney has been working on a set of classes, educational content, to help somebody know how to treat chemical safety inside of a hair salon. She doesn't work for the government. She's a private person and she has a business. But she realized that her education that enabled her to get a license as a hairstylist does not account for the risk that is present in chemical services. It accounts for all this other stuff related to technical skill, but it does not factor in safety. It is an outdated process. It's a mindset thing. It's just a different industry than many places where there are safety standards. But nonetheless, OSHA, the government body, has standards live that are mandated to be followed. So you have this gap within the industry that is kind of invisible to people. The government can look at it and say, like, hey, we got OSHA. OSHA says in these types of work, you're mandated. We got a licensing process. These people are fine. What are you talking about? You can go ask any one of those individual hairstylists. Do you know how ammonia gets around a room? Do you know how ammonia gets off of your skin once it gets on? Do you know if ammonia can go inside your coffee cup while you set it next to the bowl of color you're mixing? Do you know how to get ammonia out of your body if you drank it as a vapor? If you drink a vapor out of a cup, will it go in your body and lungs? You could make lists of stuff that they have no idea about while they're responsible as a working professional who is licensed to expose another human being to these chemicals. Like children in a salon, for example, ammonia is like right at their breathing level when it's hanging out in a salon. And ammonia is in almost every type of hair chemical that you would do for a color. And so there's just these huge things, pets, where you have the appearance of a standardization, you have the appearance of certification, the appearance of like professionalism, or what we think of that normally, but there's still a gap. And so to Ellie's point, there's an opportunity there that would increase the amount of safety that's present if you could sell the people who have to get the certification a story that it will also increase their business, because right now they're operating legally. So there's a block to getting them locked into the idea of like, oh, I just want to be safer because it will cost me lots more money. And it's like, that's a hard thing to sell. But yeah, there's huge things around that where certifications are missing from places where they really, really should be. And so looking at it objectively and saying like, whether or not I like certifications all the time, in this case, would this help something? And like, if it would help something, what would it be? And like think through that. But she's been helping people one-on-one kind of understand that bigger picture. And it's just revealed to her that like, oh, there's an actual process. You could get someone from point A to point B with, they'd be capable and much safer as a result of it. So like that's one area that I think huge opportunity for certifications in a private way is people seeing in their own industry where they work, where especially around safety, stuff could be better. I feel like, man, you could make so much money at least training people if you got good at that, because it makes a big impact all across the board if you can prove you're safe. Especially now you see people not being able to reopen because they can't stand up to the regulation they have from the government health-wise.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, thanks for that insight and that example, Brandon.
Yeah, and safety is just like a whole nother topic, right? Like we could probably spend hours on that alone. But yeah, certifications, getting certified for something and requiring more safety questions and training inside of that certification is, to me, like a great idea, because, and it's difficult because we all want to be productive at our jobs and see, productivity, but safety a lot of times slows down production. And so a lot of guys, whether it's construction or other fields, throw safety out the window so that they can be productive and show their boss or whoever like, hey, I'm getting a lot done here. For instance, in Vieira, where all the guys are working from my wife's uncle, OSHA has recently come out and just cracked down hard. And it is making a lot of the guys so frustrated and angry that some guys have even left and found other employers. And there's so much work out there that they have work every single day, weekends if they want it, but they'd rather go work somewhere else just because I don't want to wear a harness. I've worked in roofing my entire life. This is slowing me down. So I'm getting off topic a little bit, but the safety issue, I think if you could factor that into certifications for sure, that to me is more important to educate yourself on if you're willing to make sacrifices than, say for instance, going in as that painter and saying why, or even flooring. My friend went to take the flooring exam to lay tile which is funny that you need a certificate for that. But anyway, and there was a whole portion in there that he was blindsided by for terrazzo flooring. Who's doing terrazzo flooring? Like, we're not in the 50s and 60s anymore. Like, no one is doing that. Like, it's cool, but no one's doing it. But anyway, so there's things in these certifications that are completely irrelevant, and then they're leaving things out that should be in there. So anyway, I like Kevin's point about putting safety things in the certifications.
Yeah, it's really going to, like, basically looking forward, it's like specialization, increased specialization of certifications, and not really relying on governing a government or perhaps a large corporate interest to provide those things, but actually doing it yourself, developing it yourself, and selling it yourself. That's awesome. I like the way that feature sounds. Well, thank you everyone for joining and for being here with us during this discussion. We do this discussion every Monday and Friday at 12 p.m. Pacific time. Friday, we're going to this Friday we're going to discuss work-life boundaries while working from home. How to avoid burnout. We know that's a big issue that people are going through right now, and we invite you to join us for that. So feel free if you'd like to add to that conversation. That's awesome. We would love to have you. Our pre-show starts an hour early at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, and if you join us by 11:45 and raise your blue